There was a time when we were united on the dance floor, dressed to kill, and if only for a moment, it felt like colour didn't matter. Don Letts, 2016. The above quote is so laced with an air of regret that it is probably the saddest exemplar of how the skinhead movement has been circumvented and skewed by negative fringe groups for decades. It epitomises the gross lack of understanding and insight today into the topic of the skinhead and their origins. For decades now, we have witnessed a solidifying image of the skinhead as representing everything ugly and evil that could be found at work on our streets in the West. What began in the East End of London in the 60s as a youth subculture that celebrated multiculturalism and diversity, in the mutual appreciation for the new music coming in from the West Indies, both black and white youth would dance together in the burgeoning small clubs around the city. Dressed to impress and no sign of trouble, the skinhead movement began to grow, and as it did, unfortunately, it began to garner attention in the mainstream media for all the wrong reasons. Through a number of successive and markedly different developments, the image of the skinhead in the eyes of the mainstream public became sour. In the deliberate work of the sensationalist mainstream media, the genre was sullied by images of violence in the streets and on the football terraces, and through the 70s, the skinhead persona experienced its final death knell when it became infiltrated by a fringe group of politically active far right-wing nationalists. It was this shift towards the idea of the hardcore right-wing racism in the late 80s that solidified the image into that of the quintessentially violent and aggressively racist thug. The image we witness today, in the opinions of most people in the Western world, when it comes to the skinhead, is very negative indeed. It is perhaps one of the most vilified and demonized movements we have witnessed today in terms of subculture and youth. This essay is designed to clarify how the image of the skinhead has become, in a sense, an urban myth, of the type that is very much untrue, or at least scapegoat to become the badly needed bogeyman in today's culture of open borders and our inevitable shift towards a more multicultural and diverse society. This well-feared and hated persona of the skinhead thug has taken on a mythological slant, as the ordinary member of the public is bombarded with news articles and sound bites describing the problem of the far right in Ireland today. Recently, we have witnessed a marked attempt by our mainstream media to ingrain the idea of the far right neo-Nazi racist into the minds of the general public. For reasons we will discuss in this essay near the end, there has been a very biased push to apply the mythological archetype of the far right skinhead thug to that of Irish nationalist sympathisers on the streets of Dublin. And through this media onslaught, we find a tacit consensus in how ordinary people react to the idea of nationalism today. It is a form of social engineering from above, and in this essay I will put forward the argument that this rebranding of the myth is a deliberate government psyops that serves the establishment well in its bid for social control and conformity to its oppressive dictates. In an interesting side note, we will momentarily examine how the English mainstream attempted to defuse and make unpopular the notion of the hardman skinhead in two adverts on TV in the late 80s and the early 90s. There was an attempt here to demystify and depopularise the skinhead image for upcoming generations of youth. The authorities were bidding for an apostasy in the skinhead ranks and a low uptake in successive generations by softening the image and making it unattractively mainstream for the disenfranchised and frustrated youth. We will see how this attempt fizzled out, and now how today in Irish media in particular, the myth is being hollowed out and misappropriated yet again to demonise a whole new set of innocent people in the nationalist movement. This essay is designed to track the general course of the skinhead image as an urban myth and see how it is being used today and for what reasons. I will reference a recent demonstration outside Dáil Éireann by a nationalist group who are there to defend the idea of free speech, and identify how the skinhead image makes an appearance in a very surprising way, under the will of Sinn Féin councillor and her child understudy. I will also reference the work of the mainstream journalist Aoife Gallagher, and touch upon how she is an anecdotal exemplar of the government apparatchiks that have a vested interest in propagating this myth of the far-right extremism in Ireland. I will conclude this essay by pointing out and making very clear that the myth of the skinhead is being misused by our authorities, and how there is no bogeyman of the far right at work in Ireland. If there is genuinely any person actually adhering to neo-Nazi political beliefs, then they are in a very minuscule and ostracised minority. So much so that they pose zero threat to the stability of Irish political society to date, and any attempt to fuel the fevers behind this premise is nothing more than media gaslighting and a travesty to the idea of an open and honest democratic society.